A nurse's late-night drive home becomes a nightmare of flashing lights and brutal injustice. Accused, beaten, and facing a system built to crush her, Amara Lewis has one desperate call for help. But when her son dials the city's most powerful number, will it be enough to expose the truth and ignite a citywide fight for justice? The clock is ticking. The digital numbers on the gasoline pump clicked over with agonizing slowness. Each sent an indictment of the late hour and the bone-deep exhaustion that had settled into Amara Lewis's very marrow. 2:17 a.m. The fill and go was an island of harsh, sterile light in an ocean of pre-dawn blackness, its fluorescence glinting off the dew-slicked asphalt. Amara, enveloped in the soft, worn fabric of her nursing scrubs, a uniform that usually felt like a second skin, a badge of honor, leaned heavily against her car. The faint, persistent scent of antiseptic, a ghost of the hospital's sterile corridors and the human suffering she'd witnessed and soothed for 12 relentless hours, clung to her. Home, and her 17-year-old son Malik, felt a lifetime away, a sanctuary she desperately craved. Then, the night shattered. A police cruiser, stark white and aggressively modern, tore into the gas station with a predatory screech of tires, its headlights searing Amara's tired eyes. It slewed to a halt, deliberately angled to block any potential escape route for her modest sedan. Amara's breath hitched. Her heart, a moment ago a dull metronome of fatigue, now hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't a routine patrol. This felt targeted. This felt known. Two figures materialized from the cruiser, their silhouettes sharp and imposing against the glare. Officer Reed, broad-shouldered and carrying an air of ingrained hostility, his face shadowed by his cap, moved towards her with a measured, deliberate gait that exuded menace. Officer Callahan, younger, leaner, but radiating a nervous energy that translated into quick, jerky movements, took up a strategic position on the passenger side. His hand, Amara noted with a cold spike of dread, never strayed far from the butt of his holstered sidearm. "Ma'am," Reed's voice sliced through the quiet, flat, devoid of inflection, yet somehow loaded with implication. His gaze wasn't just looking at her, it was dissecting her, cataloging her the scrubs, the weariness etched on her dark skin, the slight tremor in her hands as she gripped the gas nozzle. "This your vehicle?" The question was perfunctory, the answer already assumed. Amara forced herself to meet his unseen eyes, her voice carefully modulated, betraying none of the sudden terror that clawed at her throat. "Yes, officer, it is." "Is there a problem?" She kept her hands where he could see them, away from her pockets, away from anything that could be misinterpreted. Every black person knew the unwritten rules of these encounters, the precarious dance of de-escalation that fell solely on their shoulders. "We ask the questions here," Callahan snapped from the periphery, his voice higher pitched, laced with an eagerness that felt more dangerous than Reed's stoic aggression. "License and registration. Now." The now was an insult, a clear assertion of dominance. Amara took a slow, deliberate breath. "They're in my purse, on the passenger seat. May I retrieve them?" "Hold it right there." Reed's command was a whip crack. His body tensed, his hand inching towards his own weapon. "No sudden moves. Keep your hands where I can see them." The accusation in his tone, the implication that she was a threat, was a fresh wave of cold. "Officer," she said, her voice trembling slightly, despite her efforts, "I am simply trying to comply with your request. My identification is in my purse." Reed ignored her. His gaze flicked over her car, then back to her. "Pop the trunk." Amara's brow furrowed. The demand was nonsensical, a deliberate escalation. "The trunk, officer." "Why, I've done nothing wrong. I'm a nurse. I just finished a long shift at City General Hospital." She gestured towards her scrubs, a silent plea for reason, for recognition of her role in the community. A humorless, contemptuous sound escaped Reed. "Yeah, and I'm the Pope. Scrubs don't mean a thing. Anyone can get a pair of scrubs. Step away from the vehicle. Put your hands on your head. Now, The injustice of it, the sheer blatant profiling, ignited a spark of defiance within Amar's exhaustion. This wasn't about public safety. This was about power, about humiliation. I will not. I have done nothing to warrant this treatment. I am a citizen. She never saw the blow coming, only felt it. Reed moved with a speed that belied his bulk. His hand clamped onto her arm like a vice, fingers digging cruelly into her bicep. He yanked her, viciously, away from the car. A strangled cry tore from Amar's throat as she stumbled, her balance lost. He spun her around, wrenching her arm up high behind her back in a move designed to inflict maximum pain and control. The agony was immediate, blinding. "Resisting arrest," he bellowed, his voice distorted with manufactured rage, his breath hot and stale against her ear. "You want to do this the hard way." "I'm not resisting," Amar choked out, tears of pain and outrage stinging her eyes. "You're hurting me, please." Callahan had moved in, his face alight with a disturbing, predatory excitement. He was an audience and an accomplice. "She's a feisty one. Reed, better watch her." His words were oil on a fire. The world became a dizzying blur. With a grunt of exertion, Reed shoved her. It wasn't a push, it was a violent expulsion. Amara's feet caught, and she was airborne for a sickening microsecond before gravity slammed her. Face first, onto the unyielding, gritty concrete of the gas station forecourt. The impact was brutal. A starburst of agony exploded through her skull, her cheekbone, her obit. Her knee buckled, sending another jolt of fire up her leg. Darkness swamped her senses, a brief, merciful oblivion. When her vision swam back into focus, she was on her hands and knees, the rough aggregate imprinting itself on her skin. The coppery tang of blood filled her mouth, thick and nauseating. It dripped from her nose, a warm crimson stream tracing a path down her lips, onto the pale blue of her scrubs, staining her profession, her identity. Her head throbbed, a pulsing drum of misery. She blinked, trying to clear the haze, and looked up. Reed stood directly above her, an avenging colossus, his firearm now drawn, the barrel a black, unblinking eye aimed squarely at the center of her forehead. Callahan flanked him, a silent, smirking sentinel, his hand now firmly on his own weapon, ready to escalate further. The fluorescent lights of the fill and go reflected off the polished steel of Reed's gun, making it gleam with cold, deadly promise. "Don't fucking move," Reed enunciated, each word a hammer blow, his voice a low, menacing growl that promised swift retribution for any perceived defiance. Amara's body trembled uncontrollably, a storm of shock, agony, and a profound, soul-crushing humiliation. She, Amara Lewis, healer, mother, taxpayer, was reduced to this a bloodied figure kneeling on stained concrete, a gun to her head, her life hanging by the thinnest of threads, dependent on the whims of men who saw her not as a human being, but as an object to be dominated, to be broken. They hadn't asked for her name. They hadn't run her plates. They had seen a black woman, alone at night, and that had been probable cause enough for this degradation. The silence of the deserted station was broken only by her ragged, sobbing breaths, the distant, indifferent hum of the sleeping city, and the slow, steady drip, drip, drip of gasoline from the nozzle still hanging loose beside her car. A mundane sound now imbued with the soundtrack of her terror, the glowing red digits of the pump, frozen at 37/58 down, seemed to mock her. A testament to an ordinary act twisted into an extraordinary nightmare by the color of her skin and the prejudice in their hearts. The city, her city, felt a million miles away. The cold barrel of Officer Reed's handgun pressed infinitesimally harder against Amara's temple, a punctuation mark to his snarled command. Each ragged breath she drew tasted of gasoline, dust, and her own blood. The throbbing in her face was a relentless tide, pulling her under, but beneath the waves of immediate agony. Deeper. Older pains began to stir, the concrete biting into her knees, the chilling indifference in the officer's eyes, the raw scrape of vulnerability. It wasn't new. It was a ghost, cloaked in different uniforms, speaking with different voices, but its haunting familiarity was unmistakable. As Reed barked into his shoulder radio, his voice a distorted squawk of codes and jargon, Amara's vision blurred, not just from tears or the impact to her head, but from the superimposition of another night, another set of flashing lights, another life irrevocably altered. It was 15 years ago. Malik had been a toddler, barely 2 years old, his chubby hands still sticky with the remnants of a melting popsicle. They had been driving home from her mother's house, Amar's husband, Marcus, at the wheel. Marcus, with his easy laugh and dreams of opening his own auto shop. Marcus, who could coax a smile from the sternest face and who loved Malik with a fierceness that was Amara's anchor. A broken taillight. That's what they'd said. A minor infraction that somehow, in the span of 3 minutes, had escalated into Marcus being dragged from their car, slammed against the hood, his cries of confusion and pain swallowed by the night. Amara, frantic, had tried to intervene, her voice pleading, then demanding for an explanation, for decency. A second officer, younger then, much like Callahan now, had shoved her back, his face contorted with a sneer, telling her to stay put or she'd be next. She had seen the fear in Marcus's eyes, a fear that mirrored her own, but layered with the desperate need to protect his family. He hadn't resisted, hadn't raised his voice beyond a plea for understanding. It hadn't mattered. They'd found a wrench in the trunk during their search, a heavy-duty tool Marcus used for his side work fixing cars. They'd called it a weapon. They'd twisted his compliance into suspicion, his profession into a threat. Amara remembered the cold dread that had enveloped her, the way the world had seemed to tilt and distort. She remembered screaming, Malik wailing in his car seat, his tiny face a mask of terror. Marcus had been arrested, charged with resisting arrest and possession of a concealed weapon. The charges were eventually dropped. Weeks later, after exorbitant legal fees and countless sleepless nights, but not before Marcus had lost his job, not before the light in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a permanent shadow of weariness and a deep, simmering anger he tried to hide from her and Malik. The system had chewed him up and spat him out, indifferent to the truth, to the injustice. Amara had fought, written letters, made calls, but every door had slammed shut. Every avenue had led to a dead end. She learned then, in the most brutal way, about the impenetrable wall of the blue line, about the futility of a single, unheard voice crying out against an entrenched power that protected its own above all else. Marcus was never the same. A part of him had died on that roadside, under those cold, accusing eyes. 2 years later, a massive coronary had taken the rest of him, a heart quite literally broken. The doctors had said, by stress and unresolved trauma, Amara was left alone, a widow at 28, with a young son to raise in a world that felt infinitely more dangerous. That night had carved a chasm in her life. It had taught Amara a bitter lesson: silence, while suffocating, was often the price of survival, especially for Malik. Her priority became shielding him, ensuring he never felt that particular brand of terror, that helplessness. She had poured all her energy into her nursing career, into creating a stable, loving home. She taught Malik to be respectful, to be aware, to navigate a world that would judge him more harshly. But she also tried to instill in him a quiet strength, a belief in his own worth that the world could not easily extinguish. She had endured, not out of weakness, but out of a ferocious, protective love. The memory, sharp and visceral, sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. Reed was off the radio now, his attention returning to her, his eyes still hard, merciless. Callahan had begun a cursory, almost disdainful search of her car's interior, tossing items from her glove compartment onto the passenger seat. He picked up her nursing ID, clipped to a lanyard, looked at it for a moment, then tossed it back with a grunt. It meant nothing to her profession, Her identity was irrelevant. Anything. Callahan Reed's voice was impatient. Nah, just the usual crap. Lunch bag, some papers, stethoscope. Smells like a hospital in here. All right. Callahan's voice held a hint of what disappointment, or perhaps the first flicker of doubt, quickly extinguished. He slammed the car door shut. The raw wound of Marcus's ordeal, the years of swallowed grief and anger, pressed against Amara's composure. But what also surfaced was the memory of her own subsequent powerlessness, the crushing weight of a system that had been indifferent to her husband's suffering, to her family's devastation. That old helplessness threatened to drown her now. Here, on this cold, filthy ground, she had learned to be cautious, to pick her battles, to sometimes say nothing when every fiber of her being screamed to rage. It was a strategy born of pain, a shield forged in loss. But as Reed holstered his weapon with a decisive click, the immediate threat of death receding slightly, something else began to crystallize within Amara. The metallic taste of blood in her mouth was no longer just the taste of her own injury. It was the taste of Marcus's past suffering, the taste of 1,000 unrighted wrongs. Malik, her son, was 17 now, a young man on the cusp of his own life, a life she had fought tooth and nail to protect, to nurture. The thought of Malik enduring this, of him being subjected to this kind of brutal, dehumanizing power, was a torment worse than any physical pain. Reed grabbed her arm again, his fingers like talons, and hauled her roughly to her feet. The world spun and she swayed, her injured knee protesting sharply. "You're coming with us," he stated, his voice flat, final. "We'll sort this out at the precinct." "On what charge?" Amara managed, her voice raspy, raw. It was a faint echo of the fight she had once tried to wage for Marcus. "Resisting arrest, assaulting an officer," Reed said, his lips twisting into a smirk. "Or we can make it something else. Your choice." The lie was so blatant, so audacious, it was almost breathtaking. He was creating a narrative, a justification for their violence. Right before her eyes, the past was repeating itself. But this time, it was her body, her freedom, her reputation on the line. The echoes of Marcus's ordeal were deafening, but within them, a new dissonant note began to sound, a note of defiance she thought had died with him. She was a mother, and her son was not going to see her broken by the same forces that had shattered their family once before. The thought was less a conscious decision and more a primal instinct, a deep cellular refusal to relive that utter desolation. The night was far from over. The ride to the precinct was a blur of flashing streetlights in the cold, impersonal interior of the police cruiser. Amara was cuffed, her hands behind her back, the metal biting into her wrists with every jolt of the car. Her throbbing face was pressed against the unyielding plastic partition, the metallic scent of her own dried blood, a constant, nauseating reminder of the violence she'd endured. Officers Reed and Callahan sat in the front, their conversation a low murmur of shared jokes and casual indifference, as if the brutal assault they'd just perpetrated was nothing more than a routine stop. The casualness was, in itself, a form of torture, a chilling testament to the normalization of their cruelty. At the 12th Precinct, a hulking, charmless building that radiated an aura of weary bureaucracy, Amara was processed with a detached efficiency that was more dehumanizing than outright hostility. She was paraded through a brightly lit corridor, past curious and unsympathetic eyes of other officers and civilian staff. No one met her gaze for more than a fleeting second. Her pleas for medical attention for her face, her nose felt broken. Her cheekbone was surely fractured, were met with a dismissive wave towards the stained, bare-bones first aid kit bolted to a wall in the booking area. A bored-looking desk sergeant, a man with a face like a weathered catcher's mitt, begrudgingly offered her a single antiseptic wipe and a gauze pad after she insisted, her voice hoarse but firm. "Name," he grunted, not looking up from his computer screen. "Amara Lewis. I am a registered nurse at City General Hospital. I was assaulted by officers Reed and Callahan. I demand to file a formal complaint, and I need proper medical attention. Her words, though laced with pain, carried the precision of her profession. The sergeant finally looked up, his eyes flat and unimpressed. He typed something, then glanced at a preliminary report slid across his desk, presumably by Reed, who stood lurking nearby. A smug expression plastered on his face. Says here you assaulted them and resisted arrest. He gestured vaguely with his chin. Mugshot and prints over there. Then you get your phone call. The world tilted again. The audacity of their fabricated story was breathtaking. Assaulting two armed police officers. The absurdity would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifyingly real, so potentially life-destroying. As she was photographed, the flash momentarily blinding her, she saw her reflection in the camera lens, bruised, bloodied, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning. Steely resolve. The fingerprints were taken with rough, impersonal movements. Her stained fingers pressed onto the ink pad and then the forms, each print a mark of her unwilling entry into this nightmare. The promised phone call felt like a distant mirage. Before she was allowed near a telephone, she was subjected to more questions, not about her assault, but about her crime. Reed and Callahan had already filed their official report, a tapestry of lies woven to portray Amara as an aggressor, a dangerous suspect who had initiated the confrontation. They claimed she had been acting erratically at the gas station, refused lawful orders, and then physically attacked Officer Reed when he attempted to detain her, causing him to sustain minor injuries in the process of subduing her. It was a masterpiece of fiction, designed to be impenetrable. The word of two officers against hers. You want to tell us what really happened? A detective, a woman named O'Malley with tired eyes and a skeptical frown, asked Amara in a small, windowless interrogation room. Her tone suggested she had already made up her mind. Might make things easier for you. Amara recounted the events, her voice trembling at times but gaining strength as she detailed the unprovoked nature of the stop, the immediate aggression, the brutal takedown, the gun to her head, her. She mentioned her profession, her clean record, the absurdity of her attacking two armed men. O'Malley listened, taking sporadic notes, her expression unreadable. So, you're saying two veteran police officers, with no prior disciplinary issues, just decided to attack you for no reason, a nurse, on her way home from work. The disbelief in her voice was a palpable barrier. Yes, Amara stated, meeting her gaze directly. That is exactly what I am saying. They saw me, and they decided there was no provocation. There was no reason. Check the gas station's security cameras. They will show you. It was a desperate hope. Many inner-city stations had non-functional or poor-quality cameras. O'Malley made a non-committal sound. Officer Reed states you appeared to be under the influence of something, that you became violent when he questioned you about a vehicle matching yours, reportedly leaving the scene of a robbery an hour earlier. A robbery? That's insane, Amara exclaimed. I was at the hospital, check my clock-out time, speak to my colleagues. I have an alibi that is irrefutable. The desperation was rising, the walls of their fabricated story closing in. They were not just assaulting her physically, they were assassinating her character, her credibility. The detective merely shrugged. We'll look into it. But her tone implied it was a low priority, a formality. The covert discrimination was in the immediate credence given to the officer's narrative, the inherent bias that painted Amara, despite her profession and lack of record, as the less reliable witness. The systemic exploitation lay in the smooth, practiced way the system was already processing her guilt, not her innocence. Finally, hours after her arrest, bruised, exhausted, and her spirit fraying, Amara was led to a phone, one call. The choice was agonizing. Her mother was elderly, frail. This news would devastate her, possibly endanger her health. A lawyer, she didn't have one on retainer. The cost alone was a terrifying prospect. That left Malik, her son. The thought of his voice, his fear, was a fresh stab of pain. She had spent his entire life trying to shield him from this, from the ugliness of the world that had stolen his father. Her fingers, still sticky with fingerprint ink, fumbled with the grimy keypad. She dialed his number, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. It rang 3 times, each ring an eternity. "Mom," Malik's voice still thick with sleep, but instantly alert. "Is everything okay? You're so late." Amara closed her eyes, fighting back a sob. "Malik," she began, her voice cracking. "Listen to me very carefully. I've been arrested." Silence, then. "Arrested what?" "Why, Mom, what happened?" Panic sharpened his tone. It's a mistake, baby, a terrible mistake. Some officers, they hurt me. I'm at the 12th precinct. They're saying I assaulted them." She could barely get the words out. She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end, then a rustling sound. "Hurt you, Mom? Are you okay? What do I do?" His voice was trembling now, but beneath the fear. She heard a new note, a flicker of the man he was becoming, decisive, protective. "I don't know yet. Malik, the charges are serious. I think you need to call someone who can actually help. Someone with influence." The words felt like a betrayal of her own strength, an admission of the helplessness she had fought for so long. But this was bigger than her pride. This was about her survival, her freedom. "Who, Mom? Who?" Amara thought of the city's power structures, the indifferent grind she was currently caught in. A lawyer would be a start, but that would take time. Money. Then a name surfaced, a connection Malik had, one she had almost forgotten in her current duress, a lifeline born from her own past actions as a healer. "Malik," she said, a new urgency in her voice. "Call the mayor's office. You know who to ask for. Tell them what happened. Tell them Nurse Lewis needs help." Before she could say more, a guard tapped her shoulder. "Time's up." The line went dead. Amara leaned against the cold wall, the silence of the precinct pressing in on her, the weight of the system an almost physical burden. She had planted a seed of hope, a desperate, last-ditch effort. Now, all she could do was wait and endure. The covert discrimination had her in its jaws. The systemic exploitation was in full swing. But the fight, she knew, had only just begun. The steel door of the holding cell clanged shut with a sound of chilling finality, echoing the despair that threatened to engulf Amara. The cell was small, frigid, and reeked of stale sweat, disinfectant, and desperation. A thin, plastic-covered mattress lay on a concrete slab, offering little comfort. Amara sank onto it, her body aching, her face a mask of dried blood and fresh bruises. The hours since her call to Malik had crawled by with agonizing slowness, each minute a fresh torment of uncertainty. Had he managed to reach anyone? Or was she truly alone, swallowed by the indifferent machinery of a system designed to crush individuals like her? The fabricated charges, assaulting an officer and resisting arrest, hung over her like a guillotine. She replayed the night's events, the casual brutality of Reed and Callahan, the smug disbelief of Detective O'Malley. It was a well-oiled machine. This system, they had their story, and she was just another faceless suspect, her truth irrelevant. The memory of Marcus, his spirit broken by a similar injustice, haunted her. Was this her fate too? To be another statistic, another black life railroaded by those sworn to protect. The thought was a cold dread seeping into her bones. Meanwhile, miles away, Malik Lewis was a whirlwind of frantic energy and burgeoning resolve. His mother's cracked, pain-filled voice on the phone had shattered his adolescent world. Amara, his strong, resilient mother, the woman who had faced down death daily in the ER, was hurt, arrested, and accused of impossible crimes. Fear, cold and sharp, had initially paralyzed him, but beneath the fear, a protective fury, fierce and surprisingly adult, began to burn. His mother needed him. He was only 17, an honor student juggling AP classes and his role as an honorary assistant to Mayor Thompson, a position that was more about youth engagement and fetching coffee than wielding actual power. Or so he had thought, but Amara had once done more than fetch coffee for the mayor. 3 years ago, when the sudden life-threatening allergic reaction had struck Mayor Thompson during a public event, it was Amara, off-duty but present, who had recognized the symptoms of anaphylactic shock, administered an EpiPen from her own bag, and effectively saved his life before paramedics arrived. The mayor had been profusely grateful, proclaiming he owed her a debt he could never truly repay. Malik remembered his mother shrugging it off, saying it was just what any nurse would do. Now, that debt was the only currency Malik possessed. His hands trembled as he bypassed the mayor's public line and dialed the private number for the mayor's chief of staff, a stern but fair woman named Evelyn Hayes, whom he'd interacted with during his assistant duties. It was well past 4 a.m. Hayes, a sleepy, irritated voice answered. Ms. Hayes, it's Malik Lewis, Amara Lewis's son. I'm an honorary assistant to the mayor. I'm so sorry to call this late, but it's my mother. It's an emergency, a terrible emergency. His voice was a torrent of barely controlled panic. Evelyn Hayes, normally unflappable, sat bolt upright in bed. She knew Amara Lewis not just as the mayor's honorary assistant's mother, but as the nurse who had saved her boss's life. Malik, what's wrong? What about Amara? Tears streaming down his face. Malik recounted what his mother had told him. The arrest, the beating, the accusations, the 12th precinct. He spoke of her work as a nurse, her character, the sheer impossibility of the charges. He didn't embellish, didn't need to. The raw facts were horrifying enough. They hurt her. Ms. Hayes, my mom. She sounded terrible. She asked me to reach out to the mayor. She said Nurse Lewis needs help. A long silence followed on the other end. So long Malik feared she'd hung up. Then Hayes spoke, her voice no longer sleepy, but sharp, cold, and utterly focused. Malik, stay by your phone. Do not go to the precinct. I will handle this. I will call you back. The line clicked dead. Malik stared at his phone, his heart pounding. Handle this? What did that mean? He paced his small living room, the first gray light of dawn beginning to seep through the blinds, illuminating the worry lines already etching themselves onto his young face. At the 12th precinct, the pre-dawn lull was shattered, not by a physical force, but by a phone call, a direct line from the mayor's office to the precinct captain's private number. Captain Frank Russo, a man whose career was built on navigating the treacherous political currents of the city as much as on policing, was jolted awake. The mayor himself, not Hayes, was on the line, his voice a low, controlled fury that Russo had never heard before. The mayor didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words were precise, cutting, and carried the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. Captain Russo, Mayor Thompson began, I've just been made aware of the arrest of a Miss Amara Lewis, a nurse at City General. She is currently being held at your precinct. I am also aware of the alleged circumstances of her arrest by Officers Reed and Callahan. I want a full, unredacted report on my desk within the hour. I want to know Miss Lewis's medical condition and why she hasn't received adequate care. And Captain, I want those officers' body cam footage and any available gas station security footage, queued up and ready for my personal review, immediately. There was no room for negotiation in his tone. And Captain, the mayor added, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, Ms. Lewis saved my life. Consider that as you proceed. The effect was instantaneous. Russo, his face pale, was out of his bed and barking orders before the mayor even hung up. The name Amara Lewis, unknown an hour ago, suddenly became the precinct's highest priority. A jolt of panic, mixed with confusion, shot through the night shift staff. Who was this woman who could command the mayor's personal, urgent attention at such an hour? Detective O'Malley, who had been about to sign off on her report dismissing Amara's claims, found herself abruptly summoned to Russo's office. Officers Reed and Callahan, lounging in the break room, congratulating themselves on handling a combative perp, were suddenly told to report to the captain. Now, their presence demanded with a sharpness that wiped the smirks from their faces. Back in her cell, Amara heard the shift in the atmosphere. The usual cacophony of the precinct, distant shouts, slammed doors, radio chatter, seemed to subtly change. There were more footsteps, urgent, hurrying past her cell. Voices were hushed, but carried an undercurrent of alarm. Then, the door to her cell opened. Not a guard for a routine check, but Detective O'Malley herself. Her earlier skepticism replaced by a carefully neutral, almost strained expression. Behind her stood a paramedic, a proper medical kit in hand. "Ms. Lewis," O'Malley began, her tone markedly different, "we're going to have your injuries properly looked at, and then Captain Russo would like a word. It seems there's been a development in your case." Amara stared, bewildered. A development. What could have possibly developed while she was locked away? The paramedic was gentle, his touch professional as he began to clean the cuts on her face, assess her swollen nose and cheek, for the first time since those headlights had pinned her at the gas station. A tiny, fragile seed of hope, planted by a son's desperate call and a mayor's remembered debt, began to push through the frozen ground of her despair. The first act of resistance had not been her own, but it had arrived, unexpectedly, and with the force of a thunderclap. The system, so indifferent moments ago, was suddenly paying very close attention. The paramedics' ministrations were a small island of professional calm in the storm of Amara's ordeal. He expertly cleaned and dressed the gash above her eye, examined her throbbing nose, which he confirmed was likely broken, and applied a cold pack to her swelling cheekbone. Each touch, however gentle, sent jolts of pain, but it was a pain mixed with a bewildering, nascent hope. Detective O'Malley stood by, her arms crossed, her expression a careful blank, a stark contrast to her earlier dismissiveness. The air in the precinct still hummed with an unusual tension, a sense of high-stakes activity behind the usual drab facade. Once the paramedic finished, O'Malley escorted Amara, not back to the holding cell, but towards Captain Russo's office. The corridor, which hours ago had felt like a gauntlet of accusing eyes, now seemed filled with gazes that were more curious, perhaps even apprehensive. Whispers ceased as they passed. The atmosphere was charged. Captain Russo's office was surprisingly spacious, dominated by a large mahogany desk and walls adorned with city maps and commendations. Russo himself, a man with a stern, weathered face and eyes that had seen too much, stood as Amara entered. Officers Reed and Callahan were already there, standing awkwardly to one side, their earlier arrogance visibly diminished, replaced by a sullen, resentful uncertainty. They avoided looking directly at Amara. The mayor was not physically present, but his influence permeated the room like an invisible, powerful current. A large monitor was set up on a credenza, displaying a paused image of the fill-and-go gas station. "Ms. Lewis," Russo began, his voice gravelly but unexpectedly courteous. "Please have a seat." He indicated a chair opposite his desk. "Firstly, on behalf of this precinct, I want to express my sincere regret for the distress you have experienced tonight, and for the delay in ensuring you received proper medical attention." Amara sat, her bruised body aching, but her gaze steady. It was a carefully worded apology, a politician's apology, but it was an apology nonetheless, a world away from the treatment she had received just hours earlier. "Thank you, Captain," she said, her voice raspy but clear. "What I would appreciate more is an explanation for why I was assaulted, falsely accused, and denied medical care by your officers." Reed shifted his weight, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Callahan stared fixedly at a spot on the floor. Russo's eyes hardened slightly as he glanced at his officers, then back to Amara. "That is precisely what we are here to ascertain. Due to new information brought to light, we have fast-tracked a review of your arrest." He gestured towards the monitor. "We have obtained the security footage from the gas station. Ms. Lewis, and we have the body-worn camera footage from Officers Reed and Callahan. A knot tightened in Amara's stomach. The truth, raw and unedited, this was the moment. We will review Officer Reed's body cam footage first, Russo stated. Picking up a remote, he pressed a button. The screen flickered, then burst into life, showing the shaky, first-person perspective of Officer Reed approaching her car. The audio was clear, shockingly so. Amara heard her own voice. Calm, respectful. She heard Reed's bark commands, Callahan's aggressive interjections. She watched, with a sickening lurch, as the camera view tilted wildly, her own confused face appearing close up. Then the ground rushing towards her. The thud of her body hitting the concrete was sickeningly audible. The footage showed Reed standing over her, his gun drawn and pointed directly at her head as she knelt, bleeding. There was no sign of her assaulting him, no resistance that wasn't a direct reaction to his unprovoked aggression. The camera kept rolling as Reed manufactured his justification into his radio, his voice calm and self-assured as he reported a combative female. Amara watched, her breath caught in her throat. It was all there, undeniable. The room was silent save for the audio from the video. Reed's face had gone a ghastly shade of pale. Callahan seemed to shrink into himself. Detective O'Malley, who had taken a seat slightly behind Amara, was visibly stiff, her eyes glued to the screen. Her earlier skepticism demonstrably shattered. Russo paused the footage after Reed holstered his weapon. The image of Amara, bruised and kneeling, filled the screen. He let the silence hang for a long, heavy moment. Then he turned his gaze, cold as ice, onto Reed and Callahan. Officer Reed, Russo's voice was dangerously quiet. Your report states Miss Lewis attacked you. That she was the aggressor, that you sustained injuries subduing her. This footage appears to directly contradict your sworn statement. Would you care to explain the discrepancy? Reed swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously towards Russo, then away. Captain, the situation was fluid, tense. She was non-compliant from the start. I perceived a threat. His voice lacked all its earlier conviction. A threat, Russo repeated, his voice laced with cutting sarcasm. A single, unarmed woman, a nurse on her way home from a 12-hour shift, posed such a threat that you felt it necessary to slam her face into the pavement and draw your weapon on her while she was on her knees, bleeding. He gestured towards Amara. These are the injuries she sustained. Officer, where are yours? Callahan finally spoke, his voice thin, reedy. She was reaching for something. Captain, we thought it could have been a weapon. Reaching for her purse to retrieve the license and registration you demanded. Officer Callahan, Amara interjected, her voice gaining strength, no longer a victim pleading, but a citizen demanding accountability. As I told you, as the footage clearly shows. Russo then played the gas station security footage. It was from a wider angle, grainier, but it corroborated everything the body cam had shown. It captured the initial stop. Reed's sudden grab, Amara's fall, Reed drawing his weapon. There was no ambiguity. The narrative Reed and Callahan had meticulously constructed was crumbling before their eyes, exposed by the unblinking, impartial eye of the cameras. The power dynamic in the room had not just flipped, it had been completely upended. Amara was no longer the accused, she was the accuser. The evidence overwhelmingly in her favor. Reed and Callahan were no longer the enforcers of the law, they were its violators. Caught red-handed. The presence of Captain Russo, acting under the clear, if unspoken, directive of the mayor, transformed the room from an interrogation chamber into a tribunal. Witnesses were present. O'Malley, her face now a study in dawning horror and professional embarrassment. Russo himself, and even, in a way, the mayor, whose outrage had set these wheels of justice, however belated, into motion. Russo switched off the monitor. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken recriminations. Officers Reed and Callahan, Russo began, his voice now devoid of any courtesy towards them, resonating with cold authority. You are to surrender your badges and service weapons. You are hereby suspended, effective immediately, pending a full internal affairs investigation, which I assure you will be swift and thorough. And based on what I have just witnessed, you should both consider consulting with your union representatives regarding potential criminal charges, falsifying a police report, perjury, aggravated assault. Each word was a nail in the coffin of their careers. Reed opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. Callahan just stared at the floor, his complexion ashen. The swiftness of their downfall was palpable. Just minutes ago, they held the power of life and death over Amara. Now, they were stripped of their authority, facing ruin. Russo turned back to Amara, his expression softening fractionally. Ms. Lewis, the charges against you are, of course, dismissed with immediate effect. The city will cover all your medical expenses. You are free to go. A car will be arranged to take you home, and you have my personal assurance that this matter will be pursued with the utmost seriousness. Amara nodded slowly, a wave of exhaustion, relief, and a profound, bone-deep sorrow washing over her. Justice, or at least the beginning of it, was being served. It had taken a horrific assault, a son's desperate courage, and the intervention of the most powerful man in the city to achieve what should have been a given. As Reed and Callahan were escorted out of the office by another officer, stripped of their weapons and their pride, Amara knew this was more than just a personal victory. The undeniable evidence, witnessed at the highest levels, had forced a crack in the blue wall of silence. The power dynamic hadn't just flipped, it had been exposed, for all to see. And as a construct that could and must be challenged, leaving the 12th precinct felt like emerging from a dark, suffocating tomb into the fragile light of a new day. The city was stirring, its usual morning rhythms oblivious to the personal earthquake Amara had just endured and, in part, triggered. A plain city car, as promised by Captain Russo, waited to take her home. As she settled into the back seat, the adrenaline that had sustained her for hours began to ebb, leaving behind a profound weariness, but also a sliver of something that felt like dawn after a long, brutal night. Malik was waiting at their apartment door, his young face a roadmap of anxiety. The moment he saw her, bruised, bandaged, but upright and free, he rushed forward, enveloping her in a hug so tight it almost took her breath away. Tears streamed down his face, silent and heavy. Amara held him close, her own eyes overflowing. "I'm okay, baby," she whispered into his hair. "I'm okay. You did so good. Malik, you were so brave." The news of what had happened to Nurse Amara Lewis, and the swift, decisive action taken by the mayor's office and police captain Russo, did not stay contained within the walls of the 12th precinct for long. Evelyn Hayes, the mayor's chief of staff, understanding the symbolic power of the incident, ensured that a carefully worded but unambiguous statement was released by mid-morning. It spoke of an unacceptable use of force against a respected member of the community. The immediate suspension of the officers involved pending criminal investigation, and the mayor's unwavering commitment to police accountability. It didn't explicitly mention race, but in a city with a long history of racial tension and policing disparities, the subtext was crystal clear. The story exploded. Local news outlets, initially alerted by anonymous sources within the precinct, perhaps even a guilt-stricken Detective O'Malley or a reform-minded junior officer, seized upon it. "Nurse assaulted by cops, mayor intervenes," screamed the headlines. The gas station security footage, and carefully selected, non-graphic clips from Reed's body cam showing the initial unprovoked aggression and the gun pointed at a kneeling Amara, were leaked to a prominent investigative journalist known for her tenacity. The visual evidence was damning and irrefutable. The city, already simmering with discontent over past incidents of police misconduct, reacted with a potent mixture of outrage and a newfound, cautious optimism. Community leaders, Activists who had long campaigned for police reform, and ordinary citizens, particularly from minority communities, saw in Amara's case a rare instance where the system, usually so quick to protect its own, had been forced to act decisively against rogue officers. The fact that the victim was a nurse, a healer, a symbol of care and compassion, amplified the injustice and resonated deeply. Protests, which had become a familiar sight in the city, took on a different tone. Alongside the anger, there was a sense of empowerment. Amara's story, and the irrefutable video evidence, became a rallying cry. Justice for Amara Lewis and Video Doesn't Lie were emblazoned on signs. Her bruised face, captured in a still from the footage, became an unwilling icon of resilience in the face of brutality. For Amara, the days that followed were a whirlwind. She was healing, physically and emotionally, surrounded by the unwavering support of Malik, her mother who, though initially devastated, found strength in her daughter's courage and the outpouring of community support. Her colleagues at City General, and even strangers who recognized her from the news and offered words of encouragement or shared their own stories of injustice. The internal affairs investigation into Reed and Callahan was, as Captain Russo had promised, swift. Faced with the undeniable video evidence and the direct testimony of Amara, their careers were over. Within weeks, both were dismissed from the police force. More significantly, the district attorney, under intense public scrutiny and pressure from the mayor's office, announced criminal charges, aggravated assault, falsifying official reports, and official oppression. The blue wall had not just cracked, it had been breached. Amara, though initially reluctant to be in the spotlight, realized she had a voice, a platform she had never sought but could now use. Encouraged by community leaders and with Malik proudly by her side, she began to speak out, not just about her own ordeal, but about the systemic issues it represented. She spoke at community forums, at city council meetings, her voice quiet but firm, her words carrying the weight of her experience. She didn't call for vengeance, but for reform, for accountability, for a police force that truly served and protected all its citizens, regardless of their skin color or zip code. Her story became a catalyst. The mayor, seeing both a moral imperative and a political opportunity, announced the formation of a new civilian oversight board with genuine power to investigate police misconduct. He fast-tracked funding for mandatory de-escalation and implicit bias training for all officers. The city council began debating reforms that had languished for years. The leaked footage of Amara's assault became a key training tool, a stark example of what not to do, and how quickly a situation could be corrupted by prejudice and unchecked aggression. The legal process for Reed and Callahan was arduous, but Amara, supported by pro bono lawyers from a civil rights organization, saw it through. They eventually pleaded guilty to lesser charges to avoid a lengthy trial and almost certain conviction on the more serious ones, receiving prison sentences that, while perhaps not as long as some hoped, were unprecedented for officers in that city for on-duty conduct. It was a tangible victory, a clear message that such actions would have severe consequences. Months later, as the city began to implement the first wave of reforms, Amara stood before a graduating class of new police recruits, not as a victim, but as a guest speaker. Her face had healed, the physical scars fading, but the memory of that night remained a part of her. She spoke to them of empathy, of integrity, of the immense power they would soon wield, and the even greater responsibility that came with it. She told them her story, not to instill guilt, but to impress upon them the human cost of prejudice and the importance of seeing the humanity in everyone they encountered. Amara Lewis never asked to be a symbol. She was a nurse, a mother, who had simply been trying to get home. But in the crucible of one terrifying night, through the courage of her son and the irrefutable power of truth captured on video, her ordeal had ignited a spark. It showed that even in the face of entrenched power and systemic injustice, change was possible. It demonstrated that when evidence is undeniable, when integrity finds a foothold, and when a community stands together, Even the most formidable walls can begin to crumble. The dawn. Amara knew, was not just a metaphor, it was an ongoing process, a daily unfolding of hope in a relentless pursuit of a more just world. A world she was now, unexpectedly, helping to build. Her quiet strength had become a beacon, inspiring others to believe that their voices, too, could make a difference. The city was listening.